The fluorescent lights above bed 12 flickered twice, then steadied. I stood at the threshold of the room, my stethoscope cold against my neck, my breath shallow and uneven. Inside, an elderly man sat upright in the hospital bed, his hands gripping the metal rails with a strength that didn't match his frail, paper-thin frame. His knuckles were white, the veins standing out like blue rivers beneath translucent skin. His eyes were wide, darting around the room like he was searching for something just out of reach, something urgent, something vital. "Where's my uniform?" he said, his voice cracking but firm, each word deliberate. "I need my uniform. Now." His nephew, a man in his mid-40s with tired, bloodshot eyes and a wrinkled button-down shirt that looked like it had been slept in, stood beside him. He placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, gentle but weary, the weight of exhaustion evident in every movement. "You haven't worn it in years, Joe," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're in the hospital. You're safe here, I promise." But Joe didn't seem to hear him. His gaze locked onto the wall, then the ceiling, then me. His pupils dilated, black swallowing blue. His breathing quickened, chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. And then he said something that made my blood run cold, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "They're still out there," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're waiting for me." I glanced at the monitor mounted on the wall. His heart rate was climbing, 95, 100, 105 beats per minute. His oxygen saturation was dropping, 94%, 92%, 90%. The numbers glowed red in the dim light, and I had no idea what he was talking about. No idea who they were. No idea what was happening inside his mind. But what I uncovered in the next 72 hours wasn't just a medical mystery. It was a window into a life I'd never understood, a war I'd only read about in history books, and a lesson about healing that no textbook could ever teach me. This is the story of how an 83-year-old veteran taught me what it really means to be a doctor. My name is Dr. Noah Reyes. I'm 27 years old, 3 months into my residency at Hospital St. Halstead, and I still feel like I'm pretending to be a doctor. Every morning I pull on my white coat, crisp, clean, pressed, and clip my ID badge to my chest. And every morning, I wonder if today will be the day I make a mistake I can't undo, the day I miss something crucial, the day someone doesn't make it because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, good enough. It was a Tuesday in early November. The air outside was sharp and cold, the kind that stings your lungs when you breathe too deep, the kind that makes your fingers numb even through gloves. Frost covered the windshields of cars in the parking lot, and the sky was that pale gray color that promised rain or maybe snow. Inside the hospital, the air was different. Stale, warm, recycled through vents that hummed constantly, carrying the smell of antiseptic and old coffee and something else I could never quite identify. The ER had been quiet that morning, which made everyone nervous. Quiet never lasted. It was the calm before the storm, and we all knew it. I was on my second cup of coffee, standing in the break room with its flickering overhead light and its ancient microwave that smelled like burnt popcorn. The coffee was terrible, bitter and lukewarm, but it was caffeine, and that was all that mattered. I was staring at my phone, scrolling through messages from my mom asking when I'd visit home, when Dr. Patel found me. Dr. Anjali Patel was the attending physician I'd been assigned to for this rotation. She was in her late 40s with sharp features and sharper instincts. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a tight bun, not a strand out of place, and she wore rectangular glasses that made her look both intellectual and intimidating. She'd been practicing for over 20 years, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries or unnecessary conversation. When she walked into a room, everyone paid attention. "Reyes," she said, not looking up from her tablet, "I need you on bed 12. Elderly male, 83 years old, brought in by his nephew about 40 minutes ago. Presenting with confusion, agitation, possible delirium. Vitals are stable for now, but something's off. His nephew is worried, and frankly, so am I." I set down my coffee and grabbed my tablet, following her down the hallway. The linoleum floors gleamed under the overhead lights, recently mopped, smelling faintly of bleach. A nurse pushed a cart past us, the wheels squeaking rhythmically. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in steady, monotonous intervals. An overhead page called for a Dr. Martinez to report to radiology. The hospital was waking up, the quiet morning giving way to the controlled chaos of a Tuesday shift. "What's his history?" I asked, pulling up his chart on my tablet as we walked. The screen glowed in the dim corridor. "That's the thing," Dr. Patel said, her voice thoughtful. The nephew says he's been relatively healthy. No major illnesses, no chronic conditions, no recent infections or hospitalizations. But over the past week, he's become increasingly disoriented, asking for things that don't make sense, wandering around the house at night, confused about where he is. This morning, he tried to leave the house at 4 a.m., kept saying he had to report for duty. The nephew brought him in to rule out a stroke or infection. We stopped outside room 12. Through the glass window, I could see the patient, Joe Caldwell, according to the chart, sitting upright in bed, his thin frame dwarfed by the white sheets and blankets. He wore a hospital gown that hung loose on his shoulders. His nephew stood beside him, arms crossed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his jaw, clothes rumpled. "Doctor," Patel turned to me, her expression serious. "Run a full workup, CBC, comprehensive metabolic panel, urinalysis, chest x-ray, CT scan of the head, and talk to him. Really talk to him. See if you can figure out what's going on in his head. Delirium has causes. Infections, medications, metabolic issues, but it also has triggers. Find the trigger." I nodded, my heart rate picking up slightly. This was what I'd trained for, but it still felt overwhelming. "What if I can't find it?" She looked at me directly, her eyes steady behind her glasses. "Then you keep looking. You don't give up on a patient just because the answer isn't obvious. Understood?" "Understood." She walked away, her footsteps fading down the corridor, and I was alone. I took a breath, steadied myself, adjusted my stethoscope, and pushed open the door. The room was dim, the curtains partially drawn. The morning light filtered through in pale strips, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. The smell hit me first, that distinct hospital smell of clean sheets and hand sanitizer mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. Anxiety. Joe's eyes met mine the moment I stepped inside. They were pale blue, almost gray, like winter ice, and they studied me with an intensity that made me pause. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His nephew looked up from his phone, relief flickering across his tired face. "Hi, I'm Dr. Reyes," I said, keeping my voice calm and even, approaching slowly. "I'm one of the resident physicians here. I'm going to help figure out what's going on." Joe didn't respond immediately. He just kept staring at me, his jaw tight, his hands still gripping the bed rails. His breathing was slightly elevated, his chest rising and falling more rapidly than normal. I could see the tension in his entire body, shoulders hunched, muscles coiled, ready for something. His nephew stood and extended a hand. "I'm Mark Caldwell," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Joe's my uncle. I've been taking care of him for the past few years, ever since my aunt passed away." I shook his hand. His grip was firm but trembling slightly, and turned back to Joe. Up close, I could see more details. His face was weathered, deeply lined, the skin spotted with age. His hair was white and thin, combed neatly to one side. His hands, gripping the rails, were gnarled and scarred, the hands of someone who'd worked hard his entire life. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, using his last name from the chart, pulling up a chair to sit at eye level with him. "Can you tell me how you're feeling today?" Silence. His eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking. Mark shifted uncomfortably, crossing his arms. "He's been like this since we got here, not saying much, but earlier he kept asking for his uniform, talking about people who aren't there. I don't know what's wrong with him. This isn't like him at all." I pulled my chair closer, my knees almost touching the bed. "Joe," I said gently, my voice soft, "I know this might be confusing. Being in a hospital can be disorienting, but I'm here to help. Can you tell me what you need your uniform for?" For a long moment, he didn't move. The only sound was the gentle hiss of oxygen being delivered through the nasal cannula, the distant beep of monitors down the hall. Then, slowly, his expression changed. The hardness softened, his eyes grew distant, unfocused, like he was looking at something far away, something only he could see. "I have to report," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "They're waiting for me." "Who's waiting for you?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "My unit." The words came out flat, matter of fact, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Mark sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. He was in the military, Army, served in Vietnam in the late 60s, but that was over 50 years ago. He hasn't talked about it in decades. I glanced at Joe. His hands were trembling now, the tremor visible in his fingers. His breathing had grown even more shallow, rapid. I could see the veins in his forearms, prominent and blue, the thin skin stretched tight over bone and tendon. His eyes were still far away, locked on something I couldn't see. "Joe," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm, "do you know where you are right now?" He blinked slowly, as if pulling himself back from wherever his mind had gone. His gaze shifted to the window, where the pale morning light was growing stronger, then back to me. "The hospital," he said after a pause. "St. Halstead. But I can't stay here. They need me. My men need me." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and I saw his jaw clench, saw him fighting to maintain composure. I nodded slowly, processing. "Okay, we're going to run some tests to make sure everything's okay with your health. Blood tests, imaging, things like that. Then we'll figure out the next steps together. Is that all right?" He didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands, his fingers flexing and unflexing rhythmically, as if trying to remember how to hold something. A rifle, maybe, or the hand of a fallen friend. I stood and motioned for Mark to follow me outside. Once the door closed behind us, sealing Joe inside that dim room, I turned to face his nephew. "Has he been experiencing any other symptoms?" I asked, pulling out my tablet to take notes. "Headaches, fever, falls, changes in appetite?" Mark shook his head, leaning against the wall, exhaustion written across every line of his face. "Nothing like that, just the confusion and the agitation. He keeps asking for things. His uniform, his dog tags, his orders, things he hasn't mentioned in years. Last night, I found him in the garage at 2 a.m, looking through old boxes. I don't know what he was searching for." I typed notes as he spoke. "How long has this been going on?" "About a week, maybe a little more. It started gradually. At first I thought he was just having a bad day, you know? We all have those, but it's gotten worse, more frequent, more intense." "Any changes in his medications?" "No. He's on the same stuff he's been on for years. Just a statin for cholesterol and a daily vitamin." "Any recent illnesses? Even just a cold?" "No." "Changes in his diet? Sleep patterns?" Mark thought for a moment. "His sleep has been terrible. He wakes up multiple times a night. Sometimes I hear him talking to himself, though I can't make out what he's saying." I made another note. "Does he live with you?" "Yeah. Has been for about 3 years now, since my aunt died. I have a house with an extra bedroom, so he moved in. We've managed okay. He's been independent, mostly. Does his own thing during the day. Watches TV, reads. But lately," Mark trailed off, his voice catching. "Lately it feels like I'm losing him." I could hear the fear in his voice, the desperation. This wasn't just a concerned relative. This was someone watching the person they loved slip away, confused and unreachable. "We'll run a full panel and imaging," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "It could be a urinary tract infection, which is surprisingly common in older adults and can cause significant confusion and delirium. Or it could be something neurological, a small stroke, early dementia, medication interactions we haven't considered. We'll know more once we get the results back." Mark nodded, but I could see the worry etched deeply into his face, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Is he going to be okay, Dr. Reyes?" I wanted to tell him yes. I wanted to give him certainty, hope, a promise. But I'd learned early in residency that certainty was a luxury we rarely had in medicine. The human body was too complex, too variable. Every patient was different. "We're going to do everything we can," I said, which was the truth, even if it wasn't the answer he wanted. "I'll order the tests right away. We should have some preliminary results within a few hours." Mark looked back through the window at his uncle, sitting alone in that hospital bed, staring at nothing. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking the time, for listening." "Of course," I said. But as I walked away, pulling out my tablet to order the tests, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Something about this case felt different, felt important, and I couldn't shake the image of Joe's eyes, pale and distant, looking at ghosts only he could see. The hospital moved around me in its usual rhythm as I ordered Joe's workup. Nurses hurried past with medication carts. Doctors huddled in small groups, discussing cases in low voices. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, then fading as it pulled into the bay. I found a quiet corner near the nurses' station and pulled up Joe's electronic chart on my tablet. The screen glowed blue-white in the fluorescent light. I started entering orders. Complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, urinalysis with culture and sensitivity, chest x-ray, non-contrast CT of the head. Each test was a piece of the puzzle, a potential clue to what was happening inside Joe's body and mind. A nurse approached, Sarah, one of the veterans on the floor, probably in her early 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements. "Dr. Reyes, I saw you just admitted Mr. Caldwell in bed 12. Do you need labs drawn?" "Yeah, full workup," I said, showing her my tablet. "Can you get these done as soon as possible?" She glanced at the orders and nodded. "I'll head in now." He seemed pretty agitated when I checked his vitals earlier. Might need someone to sit with him during the draw. His nephew's in there? That should help. Good. She paused, looking at me with that expression experienced nurses get when they're about to share wisdom earned through years of practice. "Dr. Reyes, I've seen a lot of cases like this. Elderly patient, sudden confusion. 9 times out of 10, it's a UTI or medication interaction. But that 10th time?" She trailed off meaningfully. "What's the 10th time?" I asked. "The 10th time, it's something deeper. Something that can't be fixed with antibiotics or adjusting a pill. Keep your eyes open." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with her words echoing in my mind. I spent the next hour reviewing Joe's medical history in detail. His chart went back decades, stored in the hospital's digital archives. I scrolled through years of routine checkups, minor ailments, the gradual accumulation of age-related changes. He'd been remarkably healthy for most of his life. No diabetes, no heart disease, no cancer. A statin prescribed 10 years ago for slightly elevated cholesterol. A brief course of antibiotics 5 years ago for pneumonia, fully resolved. That was it. His vital signs from this morning were stable. Blood pressure 138/82, heart rate 88, respiratory rate 18, temperature 98. Sodium oxygen saturation 96% on room air. Nothing alarming. Nothing that screamed emergency, but something was wrong. I could feel it. Dr. Patel found me again around noon. "Reyes, how's your patient in 12? "Waiting on labs and imaging," I said. "Should have results soon. History is pretty unremarkable. No obvious medical causes jumping out." She nodded thoughtfully. "What's your differential?" I took a breath, running through the possibilities in my mind. Top of the list is delirium secondary to infection. UTI most likely, though he's not showing typical signs. Could be early pneumonia, though his lungs sounded clear. Metabolic derangement, maybe hyponatremia or hypercalcemia. Stroke or TIA, though his neurological exam was grossly normal. Early dementia, though the nephew says this came on suddenly. Medication effect, though he's only on one medication and it's been stable. Anything else? I hesitated. The nephew mentioned he's a Vietnam veteran. He keeps asking for his uniform, talking about reporting to his unit. Could there be a psychological component? Dr. Patel's expression shifted, became more interested. "Go on." "I don't know exactly, but it seems like something triggered this. The nephew said he's been increasingly agitated over the past week, specifically about military-related things. Have you asked about recent stressors? Environmental changes?" "Not in detail yet." "Do it," she said. "Delirium is often multifactorial. Yes, we need to rule out medical causes, but sometimes the trigger is emotional, environmental. A change in routine, a loss, a reminder of trauma. Don't just treat the symptoms. Find the root." I nodded, making a mental note. "And Reyes?" She looked at me intently. "This is what separates good doctors from great ones. Good doctors fix the immediate problem. Great doctors understand the whole patient. Be great." She walked away, leaving me with the weight of her words. The lab results started coming back around 3 o'clock that afternoon. I was in the residence room, a cramped space with a desk, a computer, and a couch that had seen better days, when my tablet pinged with the notification. I opened the results, scanning through them quickly, then more slowly, my brow furrowing. Complete blood count, normal. White blood cells, red blood cells, hemoglobin, platelets, all within normal ranges. No signs of infection or anemia. Comprehensive metabolic panel, normal. Sodium, potassium, chloride, glucose, calcium, kidney function, liver function, everything exactly where it should be. Urinalysis, normal. No bacteria, no white blood cells, no blood, no infection. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. This didn't make sense. Elderly patients with sudden onset confusion almost always had something off in their labs. A UTI was the classic culprit. But Joe's urine was clean. The chest x-ray came back next. Clear. No pneumonia, no fluid, no masses. His lungs looked like they belonged to someone decades younger. Finally, the CT scan of the head. No acute findings. No stroke, no bleeding, no masses, no signs of significant atrophy or damage. His brain, structurally, looked fine. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the beginning of a headache forming behind them. This was the frustrating part of medicine, when the test told you nothing was wrong, but the patient in front of you was clearly suffering. I printed out the results and went to find Dr. Patel. She was at the main nurse's station, reviewing another patient's chart. "Results are back on Mr. Caldwell," I said, handing her the papers. She took them, her eyes moving rapidly across the numbers. "Everything's normal." "Everything," I confirmed. She looked up at me. "So what's causing the delirium?" "I don't know." She handed the papers back. "Then figure it out. Go back to basics. Talk to the patient. Talk to the family. Sometimes the answer isn't in the labs. Sometimes it's in the story." I returned to room 12 as the afternoon light was beginning to fade. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the hospital floor. Joe was lying down now, his eyes closed, his breathing steady and rhythmic. He looked peaceful almost, though I could see the tension still present in his jaw, in the set of his shoulders. Mark sat in the chair beside the bed, scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. He looked up when I entered, hope flickering in his eyes. "How is he?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper, not wanting to wake his uncle. "Resting," I said quietly, "which is good. He needs rest." "Did the test show anything?" I pulled up the other chair and sat down across from him, keeping my voice low. "The tests all came back normal, which is actually good news. No infection, no stroke, no immediate medical emergency. But that means we need to dig deeper to understand what's triggering his confusion." Mark frowned. "I don't understand. If the tests are normal, why is he like this? Delirium, that's what we call this state of confusion, can have many causes. Some are medical, like we tested for, but others can be psychological, environmental, or emotional. I need to ask you some more detailed questions about Joe's life, his routine, anything that might have changed recently." Mark set his phone down on his lap. "Okay, what do you need to know?" I pulled out my tablet, opening a notes app. "Let's start with the basics. Tell me about Joe's typical day. Walk me through it from morning to night." Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he thought. "He wakes up around 6 every morning like clockwork, even on weekends. I think it's from his military training. He's always been an early riser. I make him breakfast, usually eggs and toast, sometimes oatmeal. He likes his coffee black, no sugar. He reads the newspaper while he eats, the actual paper, not online. He says he likes the feel of it." I typed as he spoke, capturing the details. "After breakfast," Mark continued, "he usually watches the morning news. Then he might read for a while. He's got a collection of old paperback westerns he's read 100 times. Around noon, I make lunch. Sandwich, soup, something simple. Afternoons, he naps. He says the heat makes him tired even though we keep the house pretty cool." "Does he go anywhere? See anyone?" I asked. Mark shook his head slowly. "Not really, not anymore. He used to go to the VFW hall once a month, the veterans of foreign wars. They'd have these meetings, dinners, you know. But he stopped about a year ago. I asked him why, and he said it was too hard." "Too hard how?" "He said it was too hard seeing everyone getting older, getting sick, dying. Every time he'd go, there'd be fewer people. Guys he'd known for decades, just gone. He said it hurt too much to keep going back." I nodded, making a note. Social isolation, loss. These were risk factors for depression, anxiety, cognitive decline. "What about his mood generally?" I asked. "Has he seemed depressed, anxious, withdrawn?" Mark thought carefully before answering. "Not depressed exactly, but restless. Yeah, that's the word. Restless. Like he's waiting for something, but he doesn't know what. Waiting for what? I don't know. He never says. But you can see it in how he moves, how he looks out the window. Like he's expecting someone to show up or something to happen." I leaned forward, sensing we were getting closer to something important. "Mark, has Joe mentioned his military service recently? Before this week, I mean." Mark's eyes widened slightly. "Actually, yeah, more than usual. Maybe starting a month or two ago. He started asking about his medals, where they were. I told him they were in a box in the garage with his other military stuff. Then he wanted to see his old photos, the ones from Vietnam. I dug those out for him." "How did he react when he saw them?" "He got really quiet," Mark said softly. "Just sat there, staring at these black and white photos. Young guys in uniforms, holding rifles, smiling at the camera. He pointed to a few of them, told me their names, said they didn't make it home." Mark's voice caught slightly. I'd never seen him like that before. He's never talked about the war. Never. My whole life, it was just this thing that happened, this chapter of his life that was closed. But looking at those photos, it was like he was back there. I felt something click in my mind. Mark, has there been any specific trigger? Anything that might have reminded him of his service, especially in the past few weeks? Mark frowned, thinking hard. Then his eyes widened. The parade? What parade? Veterans Day, he said, leaning forward. It's coming up. There was a flyer in the mail, maybe 2 weeks ago, about a Veterans Day parade downtown. Big ceremony, speeches, the whole thing. Joe saw it when he was going through the mail. He just stared at it for a long time. How long? I don't know, 5 minutes maybe? Didn't say anything. Then he folded it up and put it on the kitchen counter. But I noticed he kept looking at it over the next few days, and that's when things started changing. I typed rapidly, my mind racing. What kind of changes? The restlessness got worse. He started waking up in the middle of the night. I'd hear him walking around downstairs. A few times I found him in the living room, just sitting in the dark. When I'd ask if he was okay, he'd say he couldn't sleep, said he kept having dreams. Did he say what the dreams were about? Mark shook his head. No, but I could tell they bothered him. He'd be different the next day, more agitated, more distant. I sat back, pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. Mark, I think seeing that parade flyer triggered something in Joe, brought back memories he's kept buried for a long time. Sometimes when older adults experience emotional or psychological stress, it can manifest as delirium, confusion, disorientation, agitation. Mark looked at me, hope and concern mixing in his expression. So this isn't medical? He's not losing his mind? It might be a combination, I said carefully, but I think the emotional component is significant. The question is, what do we do about it? We both looked at Joe, still sleeping peacefully in the bed, unaware of our conversation. Can I ask you something? Mark said quietly. Of course. Do you think he regrets it? Going to war? I thought about that question, about the weight it carried. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think maybe he's been carrying it alone for too long, and now it's too heavy. Mark nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd asked him about it. Maybe if he'd talked about it earlier. You can't blame yourself, I said gently. He didn't talk about it because he wasn't ready, but maybe now he is. I left the hospital that evening around 7, but I couldn't stop thinking about Joe. I drove home through dark streets, the city lights blurring past my windows, my mind replaying the conversation with Mark. I thought about trauma, about memory, about the ways the past can reach forward and grab you decades later. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom place about 15 minutes from the hospital. I heated up leftover rice and chicken, ate while standing at the kitchen counter, barely tasting it. I tried to watch TV but couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to room 12, to those pale blue eyes looking at something I couldn't see. Around 11, I gave up on sleep and pulled out my laptop. I started researching. PTSD in Vietnam, veterans, delayed onset symptoms, trauma reactivation. I read academic papers, case studies, veteran testimonies. The more I read, the more I understood. Vietnam had been different from other wars. The soldiers had been young, many just 18, 19 years old. They'd been sent to fight in a jungle where you couldn't see the enemy, where every step might trigger a mine, where friends died suddenly and violently. And when they came home, they weren't welcomed as heroes. They were often treated with suspicion, even hostility. Many veterans never talked about their experiences. They buried them, locked them away, tried to forget. But trauma doesn't disappear just because you don't talk about it. It stays there, beneath the surface, waiting. I read about something called late-onset stress symptomatology, how veterans who seemed fine for decades could suddenly start experiencing symptoms in their 60s, 70s, or 80s. Triggers could be anything. A news story, an anniversary date, retirement, the death of a spouse, even something as simple as seeing a parade flyer. The research showed that as veterans aged, especially after losing a spouse or retiring, the psychological defenses they'd built up over decades could weaken. The mind, no longer occupied with work or distracted by daily routines, would return to unprocessed trauma. Add to that the natural cognitive changes of aging, and you had a perfect storm for delirium triggered by emotional distress. I found a particularly compelling study from the VA that documented cases exactly like Joe's. Elderly veterans with sudden confusion, agitation, and disorientation, all traced back to unresolved combat trauma. The treatment wasn't just medical. It required acknowledgement, processing, and often reconnection with other veterans who understood. I finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning. my laptop still open beside me, the screen glowing with stories of men who'd carried wars inside them for lifetimes. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital before dawn. The sky was still dark, stars visible above the parking lot. Inside, the hospital was quiet, the overnight staff looking tired as the day shift began filtering in. I stopped at the cafeteria for coffee, better than yesterday's, and grabbed a breakfast sandwich I'd probably forget to eat. I went straight to room 12. Joe was awake, sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the gradually lightening sky. The stars were fading, giving way to that deep blue that comes just before sunrise. Mark was asleep in the chair, his head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle, his mouth slightly open, soft snores emanating from him. The room smelled of stale coffee and antiseptic. "Joe," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned slowly. His eyes were clearer this morning, more focused. The confusion from yesterday had lifted, replaced by something else. Awareness, maybe, or resignation. "Dr. Reyes," he said, his voice rough from sleep but steady. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," he said, "but better, clearer, like a fog lifted." I pulled up a chair quietly, trying not to wake Mark. The chair legs scraped softly against the linoleum. "Do you remember yesterday, being brought to the hospital?" He nodded slowly. I remember being confused, asking for my uniform. "Mark must think I'm losing it." "He doesn't think that," I said firmly. "He's worried about you. He cares about you very much." Joe looked back out the window. The sky was turning from deep blue to pale lavender, the first hints of dawn appearing on the horizon. A few birds had begun their morning songs, their chirps filtering through the closed window. "I haven't been fair to him. He's done so much for me, and I've been..." He trailed off, his voice catching. "You've been dealing with something difficult," I said. "Something that's been buried a long time." He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "You know, don't you? You figured it out." "I have some ideas," I said, "but I'd like to hear it from you, if you're comfortable talking about it." Joe was silent for a long time. I waited, not pushing, letting him decide. Outside, the sky continued to brighten. A bird landed on the windowsill, peered in briefly, then flew away. The hospital was beginning to wake up. I could hear footsteps in the hallway, the distant ding of an elevator, muffled voices. Finally, he spoke. "I was 19 when I enlisted. Just a kid, really. Thought I knew everything. Thought I was invincible." His voice was distant, like he was narrating someone else's story. "They sent us to Vietnam in 1968, the middle of it all. The Tet Offensive had just happened. Everything was chaos." He paused, his hands gripping the bed rail again, but gently this time. "We were in the jungle for weeks at a time. Hot, so hot you couldn't breathe. Wet. Everything was always wet. Your clothes, your skin, your equipment. And the noise, constant noise. Helicopters, gunfire, explosions. Even when it was quiet, it wasn't quiet. You'd hear things in the jungle, sounds that made your heart race." I listened, not interrupting, barely breathing. "Every day you'd wake up not knowing if you'd make it to the next day," he continued. "Every step could be your last. You'd see things a 19-year-old shouldn't see. Your friends would be there, laughing with you one minute, and then gone the next. Just gone." His voice broke slightly. "I lost 11 men from my unit. 11. I remember all their names, all their faces, where they were from, who they talked about back home. Danny Martinez from Texas, always talking about his girlfriend Maria. Tommy Chen from San Francisco, wanted to be a teacher. Robert Williams from Georgia, had a 2-year-old daughter he'd never met." He looked at me then, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Why did I get to come home, doctor? Reyes? Why them and not me? I've been asking myself that question for 50 years, and I still don't have an answer." The weight of his words hung in the air between us. I felt my throat tighten, felt the gravity of what he was sharing. "Joe," I said carefully, measuring each word, "surviving isn't something to feel guilty about. Those men wouldn't want you to carry that guilt. I know that," he said. "In my head, I know that. But in here," he pressed a hand to his chest over his heart, "I've never believed it. I came home and they didn't. I got to have a life, a wife, a career, years and years of life. I got to see the world change, got to experience things, and they didn't. They were just kids. They deserved to come home too." A tear rolled down his weathered cheek. He didn't wipe it away. It traced a path through the lines and creases of his face, catching the morning light. "For years, I didn't think about it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I pushed it down, buried it, got married, had a career in construction, lived my life. Joan, my wife, she was everything. She kept me grounded, but then she died 3 years ago, and I retired, and suddenly there was all this time, all this quiet, and the memories started coming back. Is that when you stopped going to the VFW? I asked gently. He nodded, more tears flowing now. Couldn't stand it. Seeing my brothers getting older, dying. Every meeting, there'd be fewer of us. Guys I'd known for decades, just gone. Felt like I was losing them all over again. So I stopped going, stopped talking about it, tried to forget again. And then you saw the parade flyer. Yeah, he let out a long, shuddering breath. Saw that flyer and it all came flooding back. Not just memories. It was like I was there again, in the jungle, with my unit. And they were calling me, telling me I needed to come back, that I'd left them there, abandoned them. His hands were shaking now, trembling visibly. I know it doesn't make sense. I know they're not really calling me. But when I'm confused, when I'm not thinking clearly, it feels real. It feels like I abandoned them, like I need to go back and bring them home. I sat forward, my elbows on my knees, looking directly at him. Joe, what you're describing, it's not uncommon for veterans who've experienced trauma. The memories don't just fade, they can be triggered, especially during times of stress or significant life changes. And when that happens, especially as we age, our brain can have trouble distinguishing between past and present. He looked at me, his expression vulnerable, almost childlike. So, I'm not crazy? No, I said firmly, my voice strong and clear. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. You're dealing with trauma that never got fully processed. And it's manifesting now, triggered by seeing that parade announcement. Your brain is trying to work through something it's been avoiding for 50 years. So what do I do? He asked, and I heard the vulnerability in his voice, the desperate plea for help from someone who'd been carrying this alone for so long. First, we make sure you're medically stable, which you are, I said. But then, Joe, I think you need to talk to someone. A therapist who specializes in working with veterans, who understands trauma and PTSD, someone who can help you process these memories in a safe way, help you carry them without them crushing you. He was quiet, thinking. Mark stirred in his chair, shifting position, but didn't wake. The morning light was growing stronger now, golden rays beginning to pierce through the window. I've never talked to anyone about it, Joe said finally. Never told Joan, never told Mark, just kept it locked up inside. And that's worked for a long time, I acknowledged. But maybe it's time to let it out. Not to forget, you'll never forget those men, and you shouldn't. They deserve to be remembered, but to honor them, to carry their memory in a way that doesn't hurt so much, to let them rest and let yourself rest too. Joe looked out the window again. The sun was fully up now, golden light spilling across the room, warming everything it touched. Dr. Reyes, he said quietly, do you think they'd be proud of me? The men I lost? The question hit me hard, struck something deep in my chest. I took a moment before answering, wanting to get it right. I think, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, they'd be grateful you survived. I think they'd want you to have lived a good life, to have been happy, to have loved and been loved. And I think they'd understand that carrying their memory has been hard. But I absolutely know, they wouldn't want you to suffer for it. They wouldn't want you to feel guilty for living. He nodded slowly, tears flowing freely now, his shoulders shaking slightly with suppressed sobs. I want to go to that parade, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to honor them, properly, the way they deserve. Then we'll make sure that happens, I said, reaching out and placing my hand on his shoulder. I promise you, Joe, we'll make sure you get there. Over the next 2 days, Joe's condition stabilized completely. His confusion cleared like morning fog burning off in sunlight. His agitation subsided, replaced by a calm clarity. He became the man Mark described. Quiet, thoughtful, dignified, but with a new openness, a willingness to talk about things he'd kept hidden for decades. But something fundamental had changed. He was lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth had lifted a weight he'd been carrying since 1969. I arranged for him to meet with Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist on staff who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD and trauma-related disorders. She was in her mid-50s, with gentle eyes, a warm smile, and a calm demeanor that put people at ease immediately. She'd worked with veterans for over 20 years and had a reputation for being able to reach even the most closed-off patients. I sat in on their first session, with Joe's permission, taking notes and learning. Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Y, Chen said, her voice soft and non-threatening. Dr. Reyes has told me a bit about what you've been experiencing, but I'd like to hear it from you, in your own words. What brought you to the hospital? Joe told his story again, but this time with more detail, more emotion. He talked about the jungle, the fear that never left you, the losses that accumulated like wounds. He talked about coming home to a country that didn't want to hear about the war, that blamed the soldiers for a conflict they didn't start. He talked about building a life while carrying death inside him, about the nightmares he'd had for years that eventually faded but never fully disappeared. Dr. Chen listened without judgment, without interruption, her face showing nothing but compassion and understanding. When Joe finished, his voice hoarse from talking, she said, "Thank you for sharing that. It takes tremendous courage to speak these truths, especially after keeping them silent for so long. I should have spoken them years ago," Joe said, his voice filled with regret. "Perhaps," Dr. Chen said thoughtfully, "but you're speaking them now. That's what matters. We can't change the past, but we can change how we carry it forward." She explained that what Joe was experiencing was a form of late-onset PTSD, triggered by the parade announcement and compounded by recent life changes. His wife's death, his isolation, the natural cognitive changes that come with aging. She outlined a treatment plan, regular therapy sessions twice a week to start, possibly medication to help with anxiety and sleep if needed, and most importantly, reconnection with his community. "Isolation is the enemy of healing," Dr. Chen said, leaning forward, her hands clasped together. "You need to be around people who understand what you went through. Have you considered going back to the VFW? Reconnecting with other veterans?" Joe shook his head, his expression pained. "It's too hard. Too many memories. Too many ghosts." "I understand," she said, her voice full of empathy. "But sometimes, Joe, the things that are hardest are the things we need most. You don't have to decide now, but think about it. Those men at the VFW, they understand. They've been where you've been. They can help carry this with you." On Joe's third day in the hospital, Mark and I sat together in the cafeteria over coffee. The cafeteria was mostly empty. The lunch rush over, just a few scattered groups of nurses and residents taking late breaks. The afternoon sun streamed through large windows, creating patterns of light on the white tables. "I don't know how to thank you," Mark said, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup for warmth, even though the cafeteria was heated. "You didn't just treat his symptoms, you actually listened. You cared enough to dig deeper. That's what we're supposed to do," I said, but I felt the warmth of his words. "But not everyone does," Mark said, his voice earnest. "I've taken him to doctors before, for other things. They look at his chart for 30 seconds, ask 2 questions, prescribe something, and we're out in 10 minutes. You took the time to understand what was really wrong. You saw him as a person, not just a patient number." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a sense of purpose that reminded me why I'd chosen this path. This was why I'd become a doctor. Not for the procedures or the diagnoses or the prestige, but for this, for seeing people, really seeing them in their full humanity and helping them heal. "How are you doing?" I asked Mark. "This has been hard on you too." He sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging. "I'm okay, tired, worried, but also relieved, I guess. I've been so scared that I was losing him, that his mind was going, that he'd end up in some facility unable to recognize me. Finding out it's something we can address, something that can get better. It's a huge relief. He's lucky to have you," I said sincerely. "I'm lucky to have him," Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's the only family I have left. My dad, his brother, died when I was young in a car accident. Joe stepped up, helped raise me, came to all my baseball games, taught me how to drive, how to shave, was there when I graduated high school and college. He walked me through my first breakup, helped me get my first job. I owe him everything." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee, the hospital sounds muted and distant. "Can I ask you something?" Mark said. "Sure. Why did you become a doctor? What made you choose this?" I thought about that question. I'd been asked it in interviews, on applications, by family members, countless times. But sitting here after these intense few days with Joe, after witnessing his pain and his courage, the answer felt different, more real. "My parents immigrated here from Mexico when I was 5, I said. "We didn't have much. My dad worked construction, my mom cleaned houses. They worked incredibly hard so my sister and I could have opportunities they never had. When I was 10, my dad got hurt on a job site. Bad back injury, fell from scaffolding. We went to the ER, and I remember this doctor, I don't even remember his name, wish I did, but he took the time to explain everything to us in Spanish, which was all my parents really spoke back then. Treated my dad with such respect, such care, made him feel like he mattered, like he was worth saving, even though we had no insurance and couldn't pay. I paused, the memory vivid in my mind. My dad recovered, went back to work eventually, and I remember thinking, even at 10 years old, I want to do that. I want to make people feel like they matter, like they're worth saving, regardless of who they are or where they come from. So here I am. Mark smiled, his eyes glistening. Joe matters. You made him feel that. You gave him his dignity back. He always had his dignity, I said. I just helped him see it again. Joe was discharged on a Thursday morning, 4 days after his admission. The sun was bright, the air crisp, but not cold. One of those perfect autumn days that made you grateful to be alive. The leaves on the trees outside the hospital had turned brilliant shades of orange and red and gold. I met with him and Mark one final time in his room before they left, going over discharge instructions and follow-up appointments. You'll see Dr. Chen next week, I said, handing Joe a printed schedule along with a folder of information. Therapy sessions, twice a week to start. We're also starting you on a low-dose medication, sertraline, to help with anxiety and sleep. It might take a few weeks to feel the full effect, but it should help. If you have any concerning symptoms, confusion, agitation, anything that worries you, come back immediately or call me. I handed him my card with my direct number, something I didn't usually do, but this felt different. Joe nodded, dressed now in his own clothes, khaki pants, a flannel shirt, a navy blue windbreaker. He looked like himself again, his posture straighter, his eyes clear and focused. The hospital pallor had faded from his cheeks. Dr. Reyes, he said, his voice strong and steady. I want you to know something. What you did for me, it wasn't just medical. You gave me permission to remember, to feel, to talk about things I've kept buried for 50 years. That's a gift I didn't know I needed. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. You did the hard part, Joe. You had the courage to face it, to open that door. Will you come? He asked suddenly, catching me off guard. Come where? The parade. Veterans Day. It's this Saturday, just 2 days from now. Will you come? I hadn't expected that. I'd planned to work Saturday to catch up on paperwork and see patients, but looking at Joe's face, at the hope and vulnerability there, I knew my answer. I'd be honored, I said. Joe smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Good. I want you to meet them. Meet who? My unit, he said, his voice reverent. The men I lost. I'll be carrying their names with me. I want you to know who they were. They deserve to be known. Mark shook my hand, his grip firm and warm. Thank you, Dr. Reyes, for everything. You've given me my uncle back. I watched them walk down the corridor toward the exit, Joe's gait steady and sure, Mark's hand on his shoulder in support and love. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating them as they walked. Just before they turned the corner toward the elevators, Joe looked back and gave me a small salute, his hand rising to his temple in that crisp military gesture. I returned it, feeling something swell in my chest that I couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or purpose, or simply the profound satisfaction of having helped someone find their way through darkness. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the sky that brilliant blue that only comes in late autumn. I stood on the sidewalk downtown, hands in my pockets, breath fogging in the morning air. The temperature had dropped overnight, frost covering car windshields and grass. The streets were lined with people, families bundling children in warm coats and scarves, elderly couples settling into folding chairs they'd brought from home, clusters of teenagers holding signs they'd made, groups of veterans wearing their unit caps and patches. American flags hung from lampposts and storefronts, snapping in the crisp breeze. The smell of coffee and hot chocolate drifted from nearby cafes, mixing with the scent of autumn leaves. The parade was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock. I'd arrived early, around 9:30, finding a spot with a good view near the intersection where the parade would turn onto Main Street. Around me, the crowd buzzed with anticipation and respect. I heard snippets of conversation, people talking about relatives who'd served, about fathers and grandfathers and uncles, about the importance of remembering, about sacrifice and duty and the cost of freedom. A woman next to me held a sign that read, "Thank you for your service," in red, white, and blue letters. An elderly man wore a cap that said, Korean War Veteran 1950-1953. A young boy, maybe 6 or 7, clutched a small American flag, waving it enthusiastically. At exactly 10 o'clock, the sound of drums echoed down the street, deep and resonant. The crowd quieted instantly, everyone turning toward the sound, a wave of silence washing over hundreds of people. A marching band appeared first, students from the local high school, crisp in matching uniforms of navy blue and gold, playing a patriotic march. The music swelled, filled the street, stirred something in everyone who heard it. Behind them came a color guard, flags held high and proud. The American flag, the state flag, the POW MIA flag. Then came the veterans. They marched in groups by conflict. World War II veterans first. Fewer than a dozen now, these men in their late 90s or early hundreds. Some walked with canes, some were pushed in wheelchairs by younger family members, but all wore their caps proudly. Many decorated with unit patches and campaign ribbons. The crowd erupted in applause, standing, cheering, some crying. These were the last of their generation, and everyone knew it. Korean War veterans came next, then Vietnam, then Gulf War, then Iraq, then Afghanistan. Each generation of warriors, each carrying their own stories, their own scars, their own ghosts. The younger veterans walked with strength, but I could see it in their eyes too. The weight of what they'd seen, what they'd done, what they'd lost. And there, in the Vietnam section, was Joe. He wore his dress uniform, not the combat uniform from 50 years ago, but the formal dress blues that fit him perfectly, pressed and clean. Mark had helped him get it ready, spending hours making sure every detail was right. Joe's chest bore medals and ribbons, earned through service and sacrifice. The National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and others. On his uniform, over his heart, he'd pinned a piece of white paper, folded carefully and laminated. As the veterans drew closer, as they marched past where I stood, I could see what was written on it. 11 names, printed carefully in black ink, each one representing a life cut short, a future stolen, a family left grieving. Danny Martinez, Tommy Chen, Robert Williams, James O'Connor, Marcus Johnson, David Kim, Anthony Russo, Christopher Hayes, Michael Foster, Sean Murphy, Eric Palmer, his unit, his brothers, the men who hadn't come home. Joe walked tall, his shoulders back, his gaze forward, his stride measured and dignified. Other veterans walked beside him, some he knew from the VFW, some he'd never met, but all united by the shared experience of having served, of having survived, of carrying memories too heavy for one person alone. Mark walked along the sidewalk beside his uncle, not marching but staying parallel, pride and love evident in every feature of his face. The crowd erupted as the veterans passed, not just polite applause but standing ovations, cheers, whistles, tears flowing freely. People held signs, "Thank you for your service," "Welcome home," "Never forgotten," "Our heroes." Children waved flags enthusiastically, some so vigorously their parents had to steady them. Older people saluted, some with trembling hands weathered by age, some with tears streaming down lined faces. And I saw something incredible happen, something that made my own eyes well up. As Joe passed directly in front of where I stood, an elderly man in the crowd, another veteran, judging by his VFW cap and the medals pinned to his jacket, stood at attention and saluted, his hand rising crisply to his temple. Joe's eyes found him, and he returned the salute with equal precision, and for just a moment, their eyes met. Recognition passed between them, that deep understanding that only those who've served in combat can fully share. A nod passed between them, almost imperceptible, but loaded with meaning. Then a woman shouted from somewhere in the crowd, her voice breaking with emotion, "Welcome home! Thank you for your service!" And others joined in, a chorus of gratitude that had been too long delayed. "Thank you! We honor you! Welcome home!" The words they should have heard 50 years ago, the welcome that was denied, finally being given. Joe's eyes glistened, reflecting the morning sun, but he kept walking, kept that dignified military bearing. But I saw his hand move to his chest, to those 11 names over his heart, and his fingers touched them gently, reverently, as if he were touching the men themselves. He was marching for them, honoring them, carrying them with him not as a burden that crushed him, but as a tribute that elevated them. He was giving them the parade they never got, the recognition they deserved, the honor they'd earned. The parade continued for another hour. More veterans from every conflict, Military vehicles polished and gleaming, ceremonial units performing precision drills, local officials waving from convertibles. But I kept my eyes on Joe's section, watching until they completed the route and gathered in the town plaza for the closing ceremony. I made my way through the crowd, weaving between families and groups of people, toward the plaza. Joe was surrounded by other Vietnam veterans now, men of his generation, talking, sharing stories, laughing even. I saw smiles on faces that probably hadn't smiled much when discussing the war. I saw hands clasped in understanding, shoulders embraced in solidarity. Mark stood nearby, giving his uncle space to connect but staying close enough to help if needed. When Joe saw me approaching, he excused himself from the group and walked over, his face radiant. "Dr. Reyes," he said warmly, grasping my hand in both of his. "You came. You actually came." "I wouldn't have missed it for anything," I said, meaning every word. "How do you feel?" He took a deep breath, looking around at the crowd, at the flags still waving, at his fellow veterans gathered in clusters. "I feel at peace. For the first time in 50 years, Dr. Reyes, I feel at peace." He touched the names on his chest again, that gentle, reverent gesture. "I think they'd be okay with this, with me being here, alive, honoring them this way. I think they'd want this. I think they'd want me to remember them not with guilt, but with love." "I know they would," I said, my voice thick with emotion. An older veteran approached, the man who'd saluted Joe during the march. He was probably in his late 70s, with white hair, a weathered face, and eyes that had seen too much. He extended a hand to Joe. "Vietnam? 1968 to 69, Joe said, shaking his hand firmly. "5th Infantry Division, 67 to 68, the man replied, his voice gruff but warm. "1st Infantry, the big red one. Where were you stationed?" "All over. Spent most of my time near Saigon, then up near the DMZ. They stood there. Two old men who'd been young soldiers in a jungle hell half a century ago, and something passed between them that needed no words. A understanding, a recognition, a shared burden now divided. "It's good to be home," the man said finally, his voice breaking slightly. "It is," Joe agreed, his own voice thick. "It really is." They embraced then, these two strangers who were also brothers, and I had to look away, my own vision blurring. I stepped back, giving them space, and found Mark standing a few feet away, watching his uncle with an expression of wonder and relief. "How's he doing?" I asked quietly. Mark's eyes were wet, tears tracking down his cheeks that he made no effort to hide. "Better than he's been in years. Maybe better than he's been since before Vietnam. He's himself again. The uncle I remember from when I was a kid before he closed off that part of his life. Thank you, Dr. Reyes. Thank you for giving him this, for giving us this. He gave it to himself," I said, watching Joe talk animatedly with the other veteran. "I just helped him find the door. He's the one who had the courage to walk through it." We stood there together, watching as more veterans approached Joe, as conversations blossomed, as connections were made. This was healing, I realized. Not in a hospital, not with medications or procedures, but here, in community, in shared experience, in the simple act of being seen and understood. 3 weeks later, I sat in Dr. Patel's office for my mid-rotation evaluation. Rain pattered against the window, a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. She looked at me over her reading glasses, Joe's case file open on her desk among stacks of other papers. "Your documentation on the Caldwell case was exemplary," she said, her tone approving. "Thorough, thoughtful, and you address not just the medical aspects but the psychological and social factors. The differential diagnosis was sound, the workup appropriate, and your follow-through excellent. Well done, Dr. Reyes." "Thank you," I said, feeling the warmth of her praise. "But more importantly," she continued, setting down her pen and looking at me directly, "you demonstrated something crucial, something that separates competent physicians from truly exceptional ones. You treated the whole patient, not just the symptoms. You listened, really listened, not just to what was said, but to what wasn't said. You investigated beyond the labs, beyond the scans. You made connections that others might have missed because you took the time to understand the story behind the symptoms." She closed the file, lacing her fingers together on top of it. "That's the kind of doctor I want you to become, Reyes. The kind who remembers that behind every symptom is a story, and sometimes that story is the key to healing. The kind who sees patients as people first, diagnoses second. I learned that from him," I said honestly. "From Joe. He taught me more in those few days than I've learned in months of rounds." And that's the other sign of a good doctor, she said, a small smile playing at her lips. The humility to learn from your patients. They'll teach you things no textbook can, no lecture can convey, if you let them. Many doctors forget that, or never learn it in the first place. Don't be one of them. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Confidence. Not the arrogant kind that comes from thinking you know everything, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you're on the right path, that you're learning the right lessons, that you're becoming the kind of doctor you want to be. Joe continued his therapy with Dr. Chen, attending sessions twice a week religiously. Mark sent me regular email updates, which I looked forward to more than I expected. 1 month after the parade, I received this message. Dr. Reyes, I wanted to give you an update on Joe. He's doing remarkably well. The therapy with Dr. Chen has been transformative. He talks about things now, not obsessively, but openly when the moment calls for it. He's reconnected with the VFW, attends meetings twice a month, and has even started helping organize their events. But the most incredible thing is that he's been talking to students at the local college about Vietnam, about the importance of mental health for veterans, about not keeping trauma buried. He spoke to a class last week, and the professor told me it was the most powerful lecture they'd had all semester. Students came up to him afterward, thanking him, some crying. He sleeps better now. The nightmares have mostly stopped. When they do come, he knows how to handle them. He started reading again, going for walks, even talking about maybe getting a dog. The confusion hasn't returned, not once. He's clear, present, himself. I wanted you to know that you made this possible. You saved his life in a way that goes beyond medicine. You gave him his dignity back, his purpose, his peace. Thank you will never be enough, but thank you. Mark, I printed that email and kept it in my locker at the hospital, right next to the military coin Joe had given me. On the hard days, and there were many, days when patients didn't make it, when diagnoses came too late, when nothing I did seemed to help, I'd read it and hold that coin and remember why I'd chosen this path. 6 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, I was walking through the hospital lobby when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Joe and Mark entering through the main doors, sunlight streaming in behind them. Joe looked healthy, vibrant even, a spring in his step I hadn't seen before. Color bloomed in his cheeks, and his eyes were bright and alert. "Dr. Reyes," Joe said, approaching with a wide smile, his hand extended. "We were hoping we'd run into you." "Joe, Mark," I said, shaking their hands warmly. "What brings you by?" "Routine blood work appointment," Joe said, waving dismissively. "Dr. Chen wanted to make sure the sertraline levels are good, but I really came hoping to see you. Wanted you to know I'm doing well, really well." "I can see that," I said, smiling at the transformation. "You look great." "I feel great," he said emphatically. "Better than I have in decades. I've been busy, actually. I'm speaking at the VA hospital next month, talking to younger veterans about PTSD, about the importance of getting help early. And I'm working with Dr. Chen on a support group specifically for Vietnam vets. So many of us never talked about it, never processed it. It's time." "That's incredible, Joe," I said, genuinely moved by his transformation from patient to advocate. "And I wanted to give you something," Joe said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to me, his hands steady and sure. I opened it carefully. Inside was a military coin, bronze and heavy, engraved with the insignia of the 5th Infantry Division. On one side was the division emblem, on the other was engraved, "For service above self." "This belonged to my unit commander, Captain James Erickson," Joe said, his voice reverent. "He gave it to me the day I left Vietnam, my last day in country. Told me to pass it on someday to someone who understood the true weight of duty and service. I've carried it for 50 years, waiting for the right person. I want you to have it." I was speechless, holding this piece of history, this symbol of service and sacrifice and honor. "Joe, I can't." "You can," he said firmly, his voice brooking no argument. "You have to. You earned it. You helped me find my way back, helped me honor my brothers the right way. That's a kind of service, too. That's duty fulfilled." I looked at the coin, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. "I'll treasure it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I promise." "I know you will," Joe said, his eyes glistening. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture both paternal and fraternal. "Take care of yourself, Dr. Reyes, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep listening to people. Keep seeing them as more than their symptoms. Keep being the kind of doctor who understands that healing happens in here." He touched his chest, over his heart, "as much as it does in here." He touched his head. "I will," I promised, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Mark stepped forward and embraced me briefly, a quick hug that conveyed gratitude words couldn't capture. "You changed our lives," he said simply. I watched them walk away toward the elevators, Joe talking animatedly to Mark about his upcoming speaking engagement, both of them laughing at something, the sound echoing in the lobby. Two people who'd found their way through darkness and emerged not just intact, but stronger. The sunlight through the windows seemed to follow them, illuminating their path. That night, I stood on my small apartment balcony. The city lights spread out before me like stars brought down to earth. The night was warm, spring finally having arrived after the long winter. I held Joe's coin in my hand, turning it over and over, feeling the ridges of the engraving. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, my parents' sacrifices, leaving everything they knew to give their children opportunities, my years of studying late into the night, the long hours and exhausting rotations, the moments of doubt and the moments of triumph. I thought about all the patients I'd seen, all the lives I'd touched or tried to touch, all the times I'd felt inadequate and overwhelmed, wondering if I'd made the right choice. And I thought about Joe, about 11 names carried over a heart that had finally learned to forgive itself for surviving. In medicine, we talk about saving lives in dramatic terms, emergency surgeries that pull someone back from the brink, life-saving medications that cure disease, heroic interventions in the ER or ICU. We think of life-saving as loud, as urgent, as immediate, but sometimes saving a life is quieter than that. Sometimes it's sitting with someone in their confusion and helping them find clarity. Sometimes it's listening to a story that's been held too long in silence, giving it space to breathe and be heard. Sometimes it's helping someone forgive themselves for surviving when others didn't, helping them understand that living isn't betrayal. It's honoring those who fell. Joe taught me that healing isn't always about fixing the body, about correcting lab values or prescribing medications. Sometimes it's about freeing the soul, about lifting burdens, about creating space for peace. I'd entered medicine thinking I'd learn about diseases, treatments, protocols, the science of the human body, and I had. I'd learned about pathophysiology and pharmacology, about differential diagnoses and evidence-based medicine. But the real lesson, the one that would shape the rest of my career, the one that would define what kind of doctor I became, was this: every patient is a universe. Every symptom is a story. Every number on a chart, every complaint, every visit represents a life lived, with all its joy and pain and complexity and history. The truly great doctors don't just treat diseases. They witness humanity. They honor stories. They understand that the deepest healing happens when someone feels truly seen, truly heard, truly valued. As I stood there, the city humming below me, car horns and distant music and the general buzz of life, I made a promise to every patient I'd encounter in the years ahead. I promised to listen, really listen, not just to symptoms, but to stories. To look beyond the obvious, beyond what's written in the chart. To ask not just what's wrong, but what happened? What's the story here? To remember that behind every confused question, every unexplained symptom, every difficult case, there's a human being carrying something heavy. And sometimes, the greatest medicine we can offer is simply to help them set it down, to help them see that what they're carrying doesn't have to crush them. Joe had asked for his uniform, not because he was lost in the past, stuck in some delusion. He asked for it because he needed to honor it, needed to honor the young man he'd been and the men who'd died beside him. He needed to stand tall one more time for the brothers he'd lost, to carry their names forward into light, to say clearly and publicly, "I remember you. You mattered. Your sacrifice was real and it won't be forgotten." In helping him do that, in giving him permission to remember and to grieve and to honor, I'd learned what it truly meant to heal. The coin was warm in my hand now, warmed by my body heat and the spring air, carrying with it decades of history. A young captain in a jungle giving it to a 19-year-old private, that private carrying it through decades of silence, and now passing it forward to a young doctor trying to learn what it means to serve. I thought about the weight of that history, about the responsibility it represented. I thought about who I wanted to be as a doctor, about the kind of physician my parents had sacrificed so much for me to become. Not just competent, not just knowledgeable, but compassionate. Someone who saw the whole person. Someone who understood that medicine is as much about humanity as it is about science. Sometimes the uniform isn't about going back to war. Sometimes it's not about the past at all, not really. Sometimes it's about finally After 50 years of silence and guilt and carrying ghosts, coming home. And sometimes a doctor's job is simply to light the way, to hold the lantern steady while someone finds their path through darkness. I would remember that. I would carry it with me just as I carried Joe's coin, just as he carried those 11 names. We all carry something. The question is whether we carry it alone in darkness, or whether we allow others to help us bear it, to shine light on it, to honor what it represents. Joe taught me that, and I would spend the rest of my career trying to teach it to others.